Tonight, we're kicking off a new series in the book of Ruth. So Ruth is in the Old Testament. If you have your Bible, go ahead and turn there. It's right after Judges, and then it's Ruth. So if you don't have your Bible with you, we'll have the verses up on the screen tonight like we normally do. And here's what you need to know about this series. It's going to be pretty straightforward in how we're setting it up. We have 4 weeks that we're going to talk about Ruth. There are 4 chapters in Ruth, so we're going to take 1.5. No, I'm just kidding. We're going to do 1 each time. And tonight is Ruth 1, and we're going to walk through this story. And I want to tell you up front what to be looking for tonight as I teach. So we're going to read through it together. As we do, I want to highlight some themes that you're going to see not just tonight, but all 4 weeks of this series. And 2 of them are up on the screen, so you should remember these words, I hope. Kindness and redemption are 2 of the themes that we see in the book of Ruth. The third one that just felt like a lot of words to add to the slide is the only reason it's not up there. But it's God's plan is the other theme that we're going to see. That God's plan is at work all throughout this story. And kindness and redemption are 2 of the themes that we see as we go through it. So the reason I tell you that is literally in however long it takes me to read this and talk through it with you guys, at the end of it, we're going to go back and I'm going to say, now let's look at where we see kindness in the story. I'm going to do the same for redemption, and we're going to do the same for God's plan. So I'm telling you that now so that I'm hopeful that as we read these, you're going to be paying attention to those 3 themes as we go. Be looking for kindness, be looking for redemption, be looking for God's plan. Kindness is something that you probably have a pretty good grasp on what that means, right? To be kind to someone is to put them before yourselves, to do things that are thoughtful for them, to not be selfish in your interactions with them. Redemption may be one that is a little harder to define. It's the idea of gaining something back that has been lost. A lot of times this shows up in sports. If you see a team that gets annihilated by one team, and the next time they play, the team that got annihilated the first time wins, you would call it a redemption story, right? That they lost, they suffered greatly, they failed miserably, but there was redemption because in the end they came back and won. Movies are full of redemption moments. Stories, we love a redemption story where someone starts out in failure but then rises to success. And we're going to see this on an even grander scale in this story. And then, because redemption is also a biblical word and a biblical concept where God redeems us, where he created us to be in a relationship with him, but because of our sin, we were far from him, and then he redeems us. He brings us back into relationship with him by the work of Jesus. So redemption is a theme of the whole Bible, and it shows up here in Ruth. And then the last one, God's plan, is pretty straightforward, right? It's that God has a plan and he's working it out even in the moments that people living out that plan don't see it or feel it. You may have had an experience like that. They're going to have that tonight as we read through Ruth chapter 1. So those are things to be looking for. One other quick note before we jump in. I love stories. I don't know if you do too, if you're someone who likes movies, or maybe you like songwriting that tells a story. Maybe you like TV shows and watching characters develop and see the arc or the trajectory. Like you watch something like Rocky and you're like, yeah, I want to go punch something. Or you watch something like Bluey if you're like me and you just want to be a better person because it's such a happy show, a happy little show. And also desperately sad in moments. But anyway, like good art, good storytelling makes us feel something and want to learn from it. This should do that on an even greater level because not only is the story of Ruth beautiful, it's also in the Bible, which means there's an eternal weight to it. Like there's a purpose for God including this in his word for us. So as we read it, remember, these are real people who really lived, who really did these things, and we can really learn from them and be inspired to change our lives based on these because the same God at work in this story is at work in our stories as well. So with that in mind, let's jump into Ruth chapter 1. We're going to start with the first 5 verses. Here's what it says. In the days when the judges ruled in Israel, a severe famine came upon the land. I'm going to pause real quick. The days when judges ruled Israel, remember the book of Judges is right before this. This is a time in Israel's history where they did not yet have a king. They were following God and he was their ruler, and yet there were moments that they stopped following God and turned away from him, and he would allow them to be captured by another nation. And when that would happen, they would cry out to God. God would send a judge, and not someone with like a gavel and a robe and a courtroom, but someone who would be a conquering hero and set them free, and they would worship God again for a while, and then the book of Judges has this pattern where they fall back into idolatry, they turn away from God, and they're captured again. It goes around and around and around. It's a very depressing book to read, and it's like all this brokenness, and really it's this idea that we need God. We need some goodness, and we don't have that within ourselves. When left to our own devices, we choose poorly. And so it was in that time frame that this story happened. There was a severe famine, which means there was no food. People were struggling to survive and make money for their families. And so a man from Bethlehem, you may recognize that town as the place that Jesus was born, in Judah, left his home, this was long before Jesus was born, and went to live in the country of Moab, taking his wife and 2 sons with him. So far we have a husband, a wife, 2 sons. The man's name, we should bring this name back, by the way, Elimelech. It's really fun to say. The man's name was Elimelech, and his wife was Naomi. Their 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in the land of Judah. And when they reached Moab, they settled there. Then, bad news starts in verse 3. Elimelech died, and Naomi was left with her 2 sons. The 2 sons married Moabite women, so women who were from the area that they were living, not the area they were from. The 2 sons married Moabite women. One married a woman named Orpah, not to be confused with Oprah, and another, a woman named Ruth. But about 10 years later, both Mahlon and Chilion died. This left Naomi alone without her 2 sons or husband. So, family leaves Bethlehem, goes to Moab. The family was a mother, a father, 2 sons. Father dies, 10 years pass. In that 10 years, sons both get married to Moabite women. Then the sons both die. Now it's the mother and the 2 daughters-in-law. So she's not related by blood to any of them. This also posed a really big problem because in that culture, for them to be able to live and survive, the husband and the sons would be the ones who would provide financially for them. So there's already this famine happening. They're now in this place where it's like, how do we even live and survive? Like, what does this look like for us? And so this is where we pick up this story. It's depressing at first, okay? It's obviously not a good time to be Naomi or be in her family. And so they're stressed. They're freaking out. They're like, what do we do? Let's keep going and find out what they do. So in verse 6, then Naomi heard from Moab that the Lord had blessed his people in Judah by giving them good crops again. So here's a glimmer of hope in the middle of this story. So Naomi and her daughters-in-law got ready to leave Moab to return to her homeland. With her 2 daughters-in-law, she set out from the place where she'd been living, and they took the road that would lead them back to Judah. So far, all 3 are together, traveling back to Judah. But, verse 8, on the way, Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, go back to your mother's homes. Now, she's not saying this because she's angry at them. She's not saying this because they've done something wrong. She's saying this because, in the verse, she continues, so that the Lord may reward you for your kindness to your husbands and to me. You see, Naomi in this moment realizes, I'm going to be really selfish if I ask these women to come with me because they're young enough, they can still live a life. They can figure it out. They can find husbands. They can continue on. They can make something of themselves. But if they come with me, they have no prospects. They're leaving their country that they know. They're leaving the people that they know. They're leaving any support system that they have. And all they have is me, and I can't provide for them. So I'm going to tell them, go. Verse 9, may the Lord bless you with the security of another marriage. Then she kissed them goodbye, and they all broke down and wept. Sad, right? Like genuinely, truly sad. So far in the story, we have death, we have loneliness, we have isolation, and you're like, Drew, you said this was a good story. What is wrong with you? Don't worry, it's going to get better, okay? In verse 10 through 13, I want to just kind of summarize this part. Basically, this is a conversation between Naomi and the girls where they're saying, no, we really do want to come with you. Like, I know you're saying go away and live our lives, but we'd rather go with you. And she has this moment where she tells them, things are far more bitter for me than they are for you. The Lord is against me. Like, as evidenced by everything that's happened to me, God is against me. Don't come with me, because if you do, your life's going to be way harder. I really want you to go. So again, there's this selflessness in her where she's putting them first, and she's trying to think about it from their perspective and give them the best chance at a life. But there's also now this bitterness that we see from her, to use her words, and the bitterness is aimed at God and what he's doing or not doing in her life. And we could understand how that would happen, right? Like, her husband's dead, her sons are dead, everything that she had. She's in a country that she doesn't know. She's traveling back home and not knowing what that's going to look like. There's a reason for her to be upset. But let's keep going. In verse 14, it picks up there and says, "And again they wept together after this conversation. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye." So one of the daughters-in-law was moved enough by Naomi's speech that she said, "Okay, I'm going to let you go." But Ruth clung tightly to Naomi. "Look," Naomi said to her, "your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. You should do the same." But Ruth replied, "Don't ask me to leave you and turn back. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord punish me severely if I allow anything but death to separate us." When Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go with her, she said nothing more. I think this is a really important moment in this story because Naomi is bitter. She's frustrated with how God has treated her or what he's allowed to happen in her life. And her response has been to push the two people that still were loving her and wanting to be with her, was to push them away. And again, it was out of love for them that she was doing that. But there's also this root there, this thing that's taking shape in her life of bitterness towards God. She's so angry towards God. And yet, in direct opposition to that, here's Naomi saying, "Say what you want to, do what you want to, I'm going with you. Your God will be my God. I will follow." And by the way, this is the one true God. The Moabites did not worship God. The people of Judah did, and they did it imperfectly, and they made mistakes. But when she's saying, I will follow your God," this is God's grace to Ruth that he's going to reward her loyalty by eventually in this story allowing himself to enter into her life and to change her life. So this is best case scenario for both of these women because now Naomi's not going to be alone because Ruth is going to be with her. Ruth is going to experience God. You see God's plan beginning to take shape here. It's somewhat stubborn of Ruth to stay with her. It's also incredible loyalty, and it's admirable that she would say, even if it costs me the rest of my life and the comfort that I might be able to find somewhere else, I'm going to stay with you. This is a really powerful moment in this story. And so it continues, and this is the last little bit that I'm going to read because we're at the end of chapter 1 after we read these verses. In verse 19 it says, "So the two of them continued on their journey. When they came to Bethlehem, the entire town was excited by their arrival. 'Is it really Naomi?' the women asked. 'Don't call me Naomi,' she responded." Now this is a weird way to start a sentence, right? Like her name is Naomi, but she's saying, "Don't call me that." Why might she be saying that? Well, it's important that we know in this culture, names were really important. Like they had meanings, and those meanings would have been known by people and would have kind of shaped their lives. And so her name, Naomi, what it means is pleasant or gentle. And she says, "Don't call me Naomi. Instead, call me Mara." The word Mara means bitter. So she's saying, don't call me pleasant or gentle, call me bitter. I know you've had bad days in your life. I've had bad days too. I've never reached the point that I've told everyone around me, call me bitter. My name's no longer Drew, right? That would be a really bad day to reach this point. And again, like I don't want to poke fun at her too much in this moment because what she has gone through is excruciating, and she's felt isolated by God, and she's felt abandoned by him. And so this is where this is coming from. And yet, we're going to see that her bitterness is going to take root in her and shape her perspective of what's happening in a way that's really powerful and not in a good way. So catch this. "Instead, call me Mara, for the Almighty has made life very bitter for me. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me home empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has caused me to suffer, and the Almighty has sent such tragedy upon me?" So Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by her daughter-in-law Ruth, the young Moabite woman. They arrived in Bethlehem in late spring at the beginning of the barley harvest. So that's chapter 1, Ruth chapter 1. Here's what I want to do. I told you what I was going to do, so it won't be any surprise to you. We're going to walk back through and look at these themes. The first one is kindness. Where do we see kindness in this story? I can think of at least 3 ways. You may be able to point out more, but here are the 3 that I picked up on. The first is in Naomi's reaction to the girls. Her selflessness towards Orpah and towards Ruth is to say, even if it means I have to be alone, I want you to go and make a life for yourself. That's incredibly selfless. Kindness, being kind to others, often looks like this when we're saying, I want what's best for you, even if it costs me something. Even if I don't get credit for it. Even if you don't even know that I'm doing it, I want to do what's best for you. So for us, if we're trying to shape our lives around kindness, which I hope that this message helps us begin thinking about what that might look like, it means that we're willing to put other people first, even at a cost to ourselves. Where in your life can you show kindness the way that Naomi did? It probably won't be as drastic as this. In some ways, I would encourage you, start small. Think of little ways that you can elevate someone else and do something for them that may have a cost for you, but it's worth it because you're putting them first. This is what kindness looks like. The second place I see it is not an obvious one. If I were to poll the audience, I don't know how many of you would call this kindness or even think of it this way, but I really think the moment where they all sit down and weep together, I think that's kindness. I think sometimes we're going to have moments in our lives where we come alongside someone else and we can't fix their problem. There's nothing we can do to make it better. It's not anything we can control. And so sometimes the best thing we can do is just sit with them and cry with them. If you're not a crier, don't fake it. That's worse, okay? You can just sit with them as they cry. But for them, they all wept. Why? Because they love each other, because they cared about each other. And their kindness, Orpah's kindness, was to say, like, no, I want to go with you. And even when she eventually leaves Naomi, she does it with tears because she cares. Sometimes, if you're worried, like, hey, this person's suffering, I want to say the right thing, God, give me the right words, sometimes your lack of words are even better than your words. And your willingness to sit with someone and be kind just with your presence is going to make a lot more of a positive difference than saying some magic word. Sometimes we just need to cry with people. And then lastly, I see kindness in the story through Ruth's loyalty. She is willing to set aside everything that she could have on her own to stick with Naomi. Think about how scary this would be for her. She's leaving the only place she's ever known. Her husband is dead and gone. And so now she's following her mother-in-law and she's saying, okay, we're going to go to your home. I'm going to serve your God. I'm going to do whatever you say because I care about you that much. That's incredible loyalty. I wonder what it might look like for us to be loyal to other people the way that Ruth is to Naomi. That's incredible kindness. So that's where I see that in the story. There's also this thread of redemption. Remember, redemption starts with failure and brokenness, and that's really where we're at in chapter 1. There's not a lot of positive or hope in the redemption yet. We're kind of in the before part of it, where things are pretty grimy and sad and difficult, because so far we've seen death and loneliness and bitterness. And so I want to just spend a few minutes tonight talking about bitterness and what it does for Naomi. And remember that redemption is coming. God's plan is still going to be worked out in the story, but let's not skip ahead to the good part because the bad part has some lessons for us too, and that's this. Bitterness changes us. If we align ourselves with bitterness, if we get frustrated by a situation, if we hold on to a grudge, if we claim bitterness for us, it begins to change our very identity. It changes the way we think about ourselves and about other people. She changed her name to bitter. Why? Because when we feel like God's against us, we can't see the positive things that he's doing in our lives. We're blinded by our own experience and don't see outside of that perspective. There's so many moments, like 2 or 3 moments in this story where Naomi says something that's directly contradicted the very next verse because of her bitterness. I don't know if you caught any of these, but she says things like, I went away full and I came back empty. And the very next verse says, and so she came back with her daughter-in-law. She didn't come back empty. She came back with Ruth because of Ruth's kindness to her, even in her bitterness. Ruth said, hey, I see that you're bitter towards God, but I'm going with you and I'm going to serve your God anyway. But Naomi couldn't see the goodness of Ruth going with her fully because she was so focused on her own bitterness. Y'all, if you are a bitter person, if you're someone who that becomes your identity, it's like, I'm a person who holds grudges, I'm a person who doesn't get over things, I'm a person that's angry at God and at others, you are going to miss the good things that he's doing in your life. You're not going to notice them. You're not going to appreciate them. You're not going to be able to enjoy the benefit of them fully because bitterness locks us into this focus on ourselves and we miss out on what's going on outside of us. Bitterness only leads to more and more isolation. It insulates us from other people. And in some ways, bitterness is a defense mechanism because it says, I'm hurting right now and I'm not going to feel this way again. So to protect my heart, I'm going to put layer upon layer. I'm going to put callus upon callus over my heart so that no one can get in here. And in my bitterness, I'm going to protect myself. But the thing is, we're miserable when we do that. And the fact that we're keeping all the bad things out means that we're also keeping all the good things out too. And we can't experience love from other people or from God if we're blocking it out with bitterness. It's like if you've ever had a pair of shoes that like rubbed in a certain spot, like maybe running shoes or athletic shoes in some way. Eventually over time you have blisters and they're painful, but eventually it gets to be this callus and it's really hard. And you could poke it and you don't even feel it, like with a needle. I watched a guy like cut off a callus one time. It was disgusting. He didn't even feel it because his skin was so calloused and so tough. If we do that with our hearts through bitterness, yeah, we may avoid some pain, but at what cost? We're not going to feel love either, not fully. So bitterness, it changes us. It feels like it has a hold on us. It isolates us. It keeps us from seeing anything good. What's the answer to it then? What's the response? Well, even in Naomi's bitterness, there was still hope all around her. And this is where we begin to see God's plan taking shape. There were threads of hope. One of those is that there's food in Bethlehem again. Remember, there was a famine. That's why they left. Now there's food coming. There's a harvest coming. There are better days ahead for this family. Also, there's the hope of her community that rejoiced when they saw her. They're like, is that Naomi? She's back. They celebrated her. There were people that cared about her. And then also, there's Ruth's promise of following God. That's a thread of hope that's going to come true. So God's plan in this story isn't over yet. Death isn't the end. The brokenness that they're feeling now isn't the end. He's going to be victorious. But again, what do we do with this bitterness that we have? Here's a final thought about bitterness, and I want to leave you with a couple challenges. The thought is this: kindness can counteract bitterness. Kindness can help counteract bitterness. You see, Ruth's kindness towards Naomi was going to pay dividends later that was going to crack through that bitterness that she's experiencing right now. Kindness is the answer. If we want to approach someone with bitterness and we don't know how to do it, the answer is kindness. If we experience bitterness in our own heart and we don't know how to get away from it, the answer is kindness. It is stronger than bitterness. It wins out in the end because kindness is from God and bitterness is not. So what do we do? What's the challenge? Two things. One, take steps towards kindness. Be mindful of Naomi and how she thought about others more than herself. Do that in your life, like we were talking about earlier. Take steps towards kindness. Maybe there's someone in your life you just need to sit with right now and let them cry or cry with them. Be kind to others like Orpah, or maybe you need to show some loyalty like Ruth does. Be there with someone when they're at their worst. Stick it out with them even when it's hard. Be kind to other people. Take steps towards that. I can't tell you exact ways you need to do that in your life, but God can. I can't tell you exactly how the Holy Spirit needs to convict you or challenge you or encourage you, but He can. I encourage you, ask Him, how can I be more kind? What areas in my life am I not showing kindness, and what would it look like to take steps towards it? And then one last challenge, take steps away from bitterness. Let's not be people who allow our bitterness to isolate us from the people around us. Let's not miss out on what God's doing or the good things that are happening because we're so focused on the things that are painful and that we build up these calluses around our heart. Ask God to soften your heart so that you can better see Him. Feel the pain of those moments, but don't stay stuck in them because this same redemption that we're going to see over the next couple weeks in this family is also already at work in us through the person of Jesus. We don't have to stay alone. We don't have to stay bitter because He has died for us. He has risen from the dead, and now He invites us into relationship with Him through faith. This is what we have to hope for. Let me pray for you, and then you'll get a chance to go to small groups and talk about this more. Heavenly Father, I thank You for the hope of this story, that we're already beginning to see cracks of it, even though it's hard, and even though it's painful in Naomi's life right now. You're working things out for her good that she can't even see yet. You sent Ruth to stay with her and to be loyal and to be faithful and to agree to follow You even before she knew what that was. And God, I thank You that Your word tells us that You loved us first. And that means we can love You back. And sometimes we take this circular route to you. Sometimes we feel like we may not find you at all. But God, I pray that we would, each and every one of us in this room, feel your love for us. We would take steps towards that love, and that it would break down any bitterness that we have built up about things that have happened to us, things that have happened around us. And instead, God, you would allow us to take steps towards kindness this week. Show us what it looks like to follow you in this way. We love you, Father. Amen.